Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel geography video. This is everyone's favourite series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And one of the things that always fascinates me when I look at a map or when I look at any form of thing to do with countries is just where countries border each other, because that's the official point where one country ends and another country begins. Again, this is fascinating to me and I could talk about it all day, and it comes up in every third video or something, but I really love the borders between countries. It's a fascinating concept, and one of the even more fascinating concepts is when you take that to the next level, when multiple places border each other, such as if you look on a map, you can see how Sweden, Norway, and Finland, they all border each other right here. There's a point where you can go from one to the other, or if you watched one of my videos recently, I went to Aachen and I went to the tri-point border between Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany, where you can literally step from one country to the other, right next to each other. It's a 3-point border. They all have to kind of jointly share. It's a crazy thing. In fact, you want to quickly see this? Let's show on Google Maps in case you haven't watched that video, but you can actually literally see, okay, this is the terrible version of it apparently, you can actually see on a map that there is a point where the 3 countries border. Here is the Netherlands, there is Belgium, this little pie slot's right there, and then the other side it is Germany. It's crazy that this sort of thing exists. And if you go to America, there's even a place where 4 states meet. There's only one of these in the entirety of the United States. Even when the US can get together and draw their interstate boundaries, there's only one point where these all meet. It's the Four Corners Monument between Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. And the fact that this can be a thing that happens is nuts. You can go from not only 3 places to another, but 4. So why, where does this happen in the world with real countries? Because there's probably a lot of multiple point borders. What is the most, borders which meet at one point? Because the answer is, surprisingly just 4, except it's not really 4, it's less than 4, but it's very close to 4, and it was 4 for a while, and it's one of those really long, complex situations that I wanted to talk about a little bit in today's video, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. Let's get straight into talking about the whole border, countries which border each other and have these weird tri-points, because again, at first it seems like, oh yeah, those must be pretty rare when lots of countries meet at once, and, it must eventually go up to a really high number, right? But the truth is that most countries have tri-point borders. There's over 100 of these in the world. I couldn't find an exact figure, and I was going to go count around all of them, but the point is every country has lots of tri-point borders if it borders more than a few countries, with very, very few exceptions, because basically, when you have multiple neighbors and those neighbors border each other, you get tri-points. So Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany, for instance, they have a tri-point. In fact, Germany, every one of its neighbors has a tri-point with other neighbors because they are kind of linearly next to each other. So there's a tri-point with Belgium, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. Then you've got Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. Every one of their neighbors and the 3 of them have a tri-point border. So there's one there, one there, one there, one there, etc. With Germany, this, the same thing goes true for any other country which is surrounded by countries. Hungary, for instance, it's surrounded by these 3 right here. They have a nice little tri-point border. Then you've got over here another little tri-point border. Tri-point border. Basically, tri-point borders are very, common on a continent where there's lots and lots of countries. And when you have places like this, where you're like, oh yeah, that actually just about makes sense, you get, get a lot of these because that's kind of how countries kind of form. So you might question, well, if tri-point borders are so common, why are quad-point borders not? And in fact, how about you explain that one quad-point border and that whole story you just said earlier? Because when we go to this place right here, so it's Zambia, Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, we get the only point on the map which looks like it has a quad-point border. Again, I was so sure that oh yeah, well, there's going to be somewhere on the map where 4 countries meet, but the truth is 4 countries do not meet anywhere on the map. Look around the whole thing, give it a quick glance yourself right now if you don't believe me, because I wouldn't have believed anyone that told me that. But if you actually go right here, you get the only place on the map that looks like it is a quad-point border. Again, by extreme coincidence, there is this little town right here, Kanzungla. Again, I'm not an expert African pronunciation, but there is a place right here, as you can see, where 4 borders pretty much meet. However, because they, it was believed for the longest time, it was a quad point, but because they had this recently kind of confirmed, they got the borders officially rectified, it actually ends up like this. And if you're curious, the distance between these 2 tri-points, which, again, these are 3 countries meeting, and these are 3 countries meeting, the distance between them is so monumentally small, it's almost unnotable. So just let's write that right here. That is 157 meters between the 2 tri-points. That is the distance that separates this from being the only quad point in the world. So a part of me says, I think that Botswana should really just get their stuff together. They've got this much land. They should just draw their border a little bit like that and make it, work the normal way. Because if you look right here, it looks like it should meet about there. In fact, they get a tiny bit more off the river this way. But again, it's internal country politics, because they do have a ferry going across it, and this causes a whole bunch of issues. A quad point border apparently was a real big thing, and South Africa, which at the time of it being a quad point border, because South Africa occupied Namibia at the time. South Africa actually did cause real issues for, the ferry between these two countries right here, and, Namibia and Botswana, and because of that, like, apparently they just decided to, redraw it a little bit, or get it officially remarked, because again, it never officially was a quad point, it's just, it never was proven to be otherwise, which is the fascinating thing when it comes to borders and countries. There could technically be quad point borders in the world, because although most borders are officially recognized, borders are always changing, and that means they could happen in the future. Again, all it takes is in the future for Botswana to be like, we'll give up literally 120 meters, on that little line, and then they can make a quad point border. And although this is probably the most stark example, and it's pretty much the only example, it is the closest thing we have to the most places meeting at one point. So you might question, like, well, Toycat, why is there only one thing close to 4-point borders? Why is there not more than that? And the easy answer to say that is like, well, it's something to do with like mathematics and the way points meet. But it's actually technically possible when you go within a country. There's a lot of examples of this. If you look at the gap between like Canada and thing, you get lots of examples of like quad points between municipalities and stuff. And in fact, the craziest example is this one right here. It's in Catania. So this is Catania. It's in the little separated bit of Italy. It doesn't look separated because it's by a very little bit. But this place right here is called Catania. So this is Catania, Italy, and the municipalities divided between this are actually really crazy because the map for them looks something like this. That's right. You get a bunch of normal stuff over here, and then you get this up here. This is a 10-point border between 10 separate municipalities. All of these individual things are a different municipality for a different region and stuff, and the reason they meet right like that is because of a mountain. So yeah, that's the closest thing we have to explaining that, but you might question, so if it can happen 10 times there, why did it not happen anywhere else? Why did, like the line between these countries not happen that way? And I guess there's two ways you can look at this. The first one is just to kind of say, well, it didn't happen, so it didn't happen. Like the strategic points to defend each border, because again, bear in mind, most countries are based on like some form of strategic boundary, although sometimes like from France to Belgium or Belgium to the Netherlands, you just cross a street and you go from one to the other. There are lots of situations where there is a distinct boundary, like between Italy and France. There is the Alps, for instance. There's mountains and stuff. It's not an easy journey to go across them. That's why the border happened that way. That's why it didn't turn into something like that. There's a lot of examples like this where you can kind of say like, well, I guess it's not really like that. And I just find that kind of fascinating to me. That example of just like, well, I mean, things didn't happen that way, so they didn't. But the easier, the kind of like other argument you can take, which again, neither of these really have too much sway, I'll admit, but the other one you can say is, well, if you had 4-point borders, let's say if every United States state was an independent country and this somehow, happened naturally, well, you gotta bear in mind that's something that would be very tricky for 4 places to agree on, and even if it does happen, that means that this border right here would be 3 separate countries, and all 4 countries would have to have all 4 border controls for all 4 other countries. That would be a messy border, it'd be a mess to maintain, and it would be very weak for invasion, because again, you can, you have to defend against 3 separate neighbors at once from this point, and although again that's really close to happening in a bunch of different places, the fact that it's really close isn't quite the same as happening. Like Russia theoretically is not going to invade Belarus, it's not going to invade any of these places, but let's say Russia wanted, if these points right here met instead of being again, they're somewhat distance apart, it's like maybe 100 kilometers. So if you look right here, there is 63 kilometers between Russia and Belarus meeting. This is Kaliningrad, so it's a bad example, but then you could say like, well, they'd have to all defend against each other, and it's not quite that. There's a lot of like, oh well, not really this or that, but the simple answer to this is like, well, mathematically it's a lot harder. 3 states meeting is an inevitability. The only way you could have like countries which didn't have tripoints is if like every country controlled an entire vertical or horizontal strip of land. Tripoints are an inevitability, whereas quad points require lots of cooperation and lots of stuff to go down, which is why they happen internally, which is why 4 states, which were created out of nowhere essentially, could get a quad point border, but anything which happens somewhat naturally, like every other United States state, which just kind of formed from the ashes, or not from the ashes, but which kind of formed by itself, you can kind of see that like, oh yeah, well, these don't naturally go that way because quad point borders aren't very natural, and although there is a 10-point border, that's more the exception. That's definitely the exception, 1,000,000% more than it is the rule, and that is why you don't see many quad point borders in the world. So I hope you did all enjoy today's video. I want to just quickly point out something which I'm going to be like looking into a bit more. I found it like hard to really work into, but I just want to say it now so you can be like, well, here you go, Toycat. Because one of the things about borders which has always fascinated me, which I've been looking more and more into recently, is the fact that some borders go into the water. So it's not very common. Like if you look at look at France and Italy, their border ends right over here. However, a few countries have their borders which go like into the ocean a little bit. So here you can see like it goes into the ocean between Sweden and Norway, and between Sweden and Finland it's the same, and between Finland and Russia it does the same. And although sometimes it's because there's like islands you can't try and prove one side or the other, there's a lot of bizarre situations where it just goes out for reasons that aren't too sure, and then you get the opposite situation sometimes where like, oh yeah, there's this lake, it's called Lake Constance, I believe. This lake right here, near Constance at the very least. This lake, there is no borders. Like, no one knows who it belongs to. It's just everyone's. And yeah, it's kind of fascinating that we have both examples. And there's a bunch of other just weird stuff. Like, again, if you look, for instance, you saw it in the French episode where I was like, oh yeah, there's this random French territory over here which has its little border. That makes sense too, but it's entirely different. So ocean borders, probably going to make a video at some point in the next like month or so. But for now, I'm just looking into it, and I want to say that, so if you want to leave a comment and be like, I'm going to be all smarmy and smart, you could tell me now, and then I could incorporate that into the video. See, look at this, we got a back and forth going. Anyway, I chose the wrong day to wear blue, but I hope you'll enjoy this video. Second channel, don't care, goodbye.